My name is Jose Cáceres. I'm the person behind Sustainable Air, Geothermal and Geologic Hydrogen page here in LinkedIn and Sustainable Air Power channel in YouTube. My latest initiative, following a few articles and videos I made discussing clean technologies, geothermal energy, and geologic hydrogen, is to produce interviews with professionals that can share their knowledge and experience with the community, which here in LinkedIn accounts for more than 3,000 followers and growing. In this opportunity, I'm honored to have Andy Wood as my first podcast guest. If you're a professional engaged in oil and gas and geothermal is in your radar of interest, you might have heard of Andy Wood and or have come across with Andy's publications, posts, and previous interviews. Andy is a geologist and a great communicator. He possesses a wealth of experience working in upstream oil and gas in several regions of the world and in various roles, mainly as a well site geologist and as an operation geologist. In 2021, he joined the UK-based geothermal startup, Serafi Energy, where he wore various hats under the subsurface manager position. Currently, Andy offers his expertise as a geothermal advisor and operation geologist. Andy, I'm more than pleased to have you as my guest for my very first interview. Welcome.
Thanks, Jose. It is an honor to be your first podcast guest. I'm delighted to be here and great to be talking to you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Now let's start with the questions. I'm sure the audience is very, very interested in listening all your opinions and all the input that they can learn from you. And I happen also to be a geologist and working in the field as a well site geologist. And I also have several years of experience in upstream oil and gas. And we know people in common, as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. And because of that, I connected with you in LinkedIn sometime in 2021. And ever since, just following, your posts, and publications, I realized that you are a very interesting person. You are very passionate for geothermal, and at the same time, which makes you also quite peculiar in a way, is that you also cheer oil and gas, which is great. Great. You don't demonize the industry like some people in clean technologies, renewable energy tend to do. So anyways, I felt the connection, and that's one of the reasons we're talking now. I'm sure many people who don't know much about your profile would like to learn from you and your experience, right? So the first question, how did an oil and gas exploration geologist like yourself got into geothermal energy? Please tell us your story.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I am from oil and gas, and that's going back to the first part of your question. It's why I support oil and gas. I know how necessary it is, and over the last several years, I've become more and more aware of energy supply globally, and I realize that oil and gas is existential. It's not something we can turn our backs on. But going to my background. As you mentioned, I actually started as a mudlogger in the North Sea, and it was a great job. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I got to kind of travel the world a little bit, mudlogging. Then I progressed on to well site geology, had a total of 11 years on rigs, and following that, I moved to operations, and all in all, 30 plus years in oil and gas. And the last half of that oil and gas career was spent on operational optimization and cost saving. It's an important role within oil and gas, but it's even more important in geothermal. The cost saving aspect is essential when you have far lower commercial profits. And as such, it was a natural progression for me. I'm a long-term environmentalist. since I was a child, really. I've always had this focus on the environment, and being able to put the environmental part of my life together with the drilling part. I mean, I've always been upstream, designing wells and data acquisition procedures and that optimization. It just seemed the perfect job for me. The idea of being able to embrace my environmental side while doing that thing I loved, you know, designing wells and talking about wells, for me, it was a no-brainer. So yeah, it's why I'm here talking to you now. It's to me, geothermal is an elegant solution. It's going to be there long term. It's growing. So yeah, it was an easy decision for me to make.
Excellent, excellent. But also, was it your choice to go to geothermal, or in a way you found that I mean, at one point, and I want to talk about the 2014, 2015 downturn that personally affected me, and it did affect many oil and gas professionals, made them reconsider other options and other opportunities where they could transfer their skills. Was it your case too, in a way, partially maybe, or not at all?
That's you know, as you mentioned, I've been interviewed a lot of times, and that's the first time that question's been asked. So congratulations, and it's actually very important. I was lucky at the beginning of the downturn. I stayed in work for quite a long time. It was the beginning of 2018 that I began to feel that instability in the business personally. Of course, I witnessed it everywhere. But from then on, my consultancy work, because I've been a long-term consultant in oil and gas, my consultancy work ad hoc, not very many long-term projects. So I was finding that I was working 6 months here and 3 months there and maybe a month there, as opposed to long contracts that went on for years. My last long-term contract, for example, was with Tullow Oil, managing the East African geological operations. And that contract lasted 7 years. So I did feel like that, like everybody else within oil and gas. But I was actually working on a long-term contract when I decided that it was time for me to start stretching my wings and looking outside oil and gas. And I think that downturn since 2014 was a large contributor to my decision. I was looking for something perhaps that was more constant, more stable. But I could also see that because I've been a consultant in oil and gas for so long, then it was very unlikely that I would have progressed much further up that hierarchy. And because of my passion for optimization and cost saving, it was important for me to be in roles that I was listened to. So yeah, I was lucky within oil and gas, but I could see that I couldn't really progress much higher. So I started looking sideways within oil and gas in a time, I guess it was the end of 2000 or the middle of 2019. And the business was beginning to pick up, but not fast enough. And to my view, it still isn't picking up fast enough. So I started looking outside. And that's when I started thinking about geothermal, because, as I said, it's a way of marrying my oil and gas experience with that environmental passion. And I just had to kind of look outside the box, if you like. And geothermal just came to light, but it was such a small business. So it wasn't easy, that's for sure.
Okay. You know, in my mind, I consider oil and gas and geothermal like distant cousins that only now are meeting each other and talking about their common ancestors and relatives and how they can strengthen their ties from now on. I mean, you can see it now, it's happening. You know, oil and gas is making geothermal life easier by all the transfer of technologies, right? and the minds of oil and gas professionals like yourself and many others, right? That they know they can use what they know, their skills, towards geothermal. So basically, do you agree with that analogy? And do you anticipate that this relationship will continue to strengthen over time and that big oil and venture capitals will invest big in geothermal? Is this perhaps something that you see happening already or something that it is imminent to happen?
When I started working in geothermal, when I started focusing on geothermal, it was a bit of a head scratcher. I was looking around and there was so little alliance between geothermal and oil and gas. There were signs of it, but it wasn't really there in force. However, and because of that, it kind of made it difficult for me to break into geothermal because of the fact that, one, it's a tiny business, but two, you were looked at kind of sideways. You come from oil and gas, so because of that, we don't really want to talk to you because there was a degree of I don't know, maybe distrust, but it was more kind of it was lack of knowledge because that relationship wasn't there. But that has changed immensely over the last 3 years. You look at companies now who come from oil and gas, like Therapy, for example, that I used to work for. They broke into oil and gas because those guys actually were from oil and gas, but they worked with GA Drilling, which was a geothermal company. And now GA Drilling has come in and has been invested in by Neighbours, an oil and gas related company. And then you have companies like John and Steve from Hefe, who are using their directional drilling and their LWD backgrounds to come up with these problem-solving technologies. And that's really heartwarming. And then there are others, and they're springing up all over the place. And then you see the fact that a lot of the new companies are coming from Houston. And yeah, everyone says, well, okay, well, that's logical because Houston is the center of energy. But more than that, it's the center of oil and gas. And so you see these guys in Houston and they're thinking, well, I can pick this part of oil and gas and I can apply it to that part of geothermal. And that whirlwind has resulted in geothermal guys reaching out to oil and gas and the other way around, and it's becoming intertwined. And that's after, as I said, I've seen that change in 3 years. Can you imagine what it's going to be like in another 3 years or 10 years?
Oh, yeah.
It's very, very exciting.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, we align totally with our views on this, and we both believe that this is only going to get stronger, this relationship. Now let's talk about a conventional and non-conventional geothermal and the technologies associated to them. Let's highlight first that geothermal energy has been used in Europe since at least the Bronze Age for recreation in thermal baths or for heating. Likewise, in other regions of the world, such as, I come from Peru, by the way, and in Peru, the Incas used geothermal also for recreational purposes. There are archaeological sites, actually. They call it, in Cajamarca, the Incas baths, right? And there is all these archaeological structures, right? And basically that's where the Inca had his socialized, while being in warm water, right? You can imagine that very high in the Andes. And yeah, it's been used for many years, for centuries, basically. But later, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, geothermal energy was then used for, many more purposes, right? For industries, even, in a more conventional way. The geothermal that we know now, that we call it geothermal, right? And it was used for power generators, where geothermal was a low-hanging fruit, where it was readily available, close to volcanic regions or tectonic active areas, right, where the hot springs were right there, right? So that's our notion of conventional geothermal. But we know that is not feasible everywhere. I mean, it's not like everywhere you have volcanoes or you have these hot springs. And that's why, it was always relegated to niche technology, and, it wasn't really in the minds of most people. But now we see these technologies, and we were just talking about this, what oil and gas is bringing to the table, right? That can be useful for harnessing this underground heat, right? And different technologies and approaches are coming along, right? So now talking about the non-conventional, the non-usual, from things like, they look like science fiction, like the millimeter wave of QICE, or this plasma bead drilling with G8 drilling from Slovakia. Or they claim they can reach up to 20 kilometers, right? And temperatures of 500 degrees, that when water reaches this very high temperature, it becomes super critical, and their potential for, you harnessing for power, is increases significantly, right? And you also have this closed loop approach of EVOR, for example, right? That thanks to directional drilling and geosteering, they can do all these loops, convoluted loops, create this radiator underground, and something that would have never happened, if there was not this interaction with oil and gas, and using the oil and gas technologies, which are quite recent technologies too, in a way, right? It's not like oil and gas have been using this for many decades. Anyways, as Andy, and the question comes here, do you see these technologies becoming mainstream and ultimately delivering the promise of geothermal anywhere in the world? Or you think they are just good ideas? What do you think?
The new technologies, of which there are many, are currently expensive. They're currently nascent, but there's enough focus on them, and there's enough passion behind the companies that are developing those technologies. They're clearly not giving up. For example, if you look at EVOR, some of their well designs created a few raised eyebrows when they first announced what they were doing, but they're doing it, and that's the important thing. If you look, their first projects are going to be expensive, no doubt, but as they go, they'll learn. The same with the deep drilling technologies. They are very, very new, but because of the enthusiasm and the determination of the people behind these companies, in my view, there will be great success stories, and they will push the industry forward. So to me, that's incredibly exciting. And you talked about the different technologies. There is at one end Seraphy, who is looking at the Occam's razor approach to closed loop, simple solutions which will be able to generate heat at surface. That heat can be used for myriad things: agricultural purposes, for industrial purposes, for district heating, for example. In the UK, 51% of energy in households is used for converting that energy into heat, whether that's for hot water or for heating buildings. There's a definite market for that. You look at the other side, the electricity generation. EVOR is looking at generating electricity from these deep EVOR loops, and there's no doubt in my mind that they will get that to work. But then you have the open loop, which has been around for a long time, but it's forever being kind of tweaked by the addition of oil and gas technology. So, and because of the collaboration between the oil and gas and geothermal, there's going to be all of this knowledge that comes from oil and gas regarding drilling and other processes that will help to raise the geothermal industry. And that to me is one of the reasons that geothermal is expanding so rapidly now. You have the new enthusiasm for green energy, and you have this new collaboration between oil and gas and geothermal, and then you have all of these crazy people who are forming new companies, and they're doing little tweaks of closed loop to little. No two closed loop companies are the same. They all have their own technology. They all have their own approach. They all have their own way of doing things. And even if only half of them succeed, then that's a fantastic start. And with time and with awareness, then the public will become aware, politicians will become aware, industry leaders will become aware, and as a result, there will be far more adoption. And that is when everything starts snowballing and becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's the exciting thing about where we are today, is the fact that the industry is expanding.
Absolutely. And only in the last 2 years, we have different companies that are using geothermal with their own approaches are having and delivering results already. And they are, testing and then proving that it works. It is happening already. And it is happening in the last few years. In the last 2 years, I see, for example, things that come to my mind is, for example, deep energy in Saskatchewan, Canada, which once completed will be the first commercial large-scale geothermal project in Canada for power generation. And their approach is simply just go deeper for deeper, hotter aquifers. I mean, because in Canada, they have drilled thousands of wells, they are super efficient and they can do it. And I understand that, they can do it economically because it's something that it is going ahead now, right? I know you are from Cornwall. They have this Eden project, right? I think their approach is mostly heating, but they know that now they can drill for very hot, very deep, right? We're talking about 5,000 meters or something, right? And that it works. Now, when we talk about the closed loop technology, we were talking about what it is called advanced geothermal systems, AGS. But also there is the EES, right, which is basically create these reservoirs. And they are using technology from oil and gas too, what we use for shale oil, fracking, right, to create these artificial reservoirs. And we also have companies that are delivering results now that they are showing that their approach it works, technically at least. The commercial viability, well, we will see with time, right? But as you know, and as you mentioned too a moment ago, with practice, with trial and error, with optimization of costs, something that you are familiar with, right? Eventually, this could become viable from the commercial perspective. And we can mention Utah Forge in Nevada. And the most recent success that I could bring up is Fervo Energy in the US. I mean, Fervo has proven that this works. These 30-day tests delivered better than expected results. So we're talking here again, open loop, that creating these artificial reservoirs. So basically, Andy, now you gave your opinion about the closed loop. I mentioned the super hot, super deep. Now I'm mentioning something a little bit that sounds more conventional, still is not necessarily conventional, basically deep hot aquifers and enhanced geothermal systems, EGS. Do you think this will eventually become commercial? What is your expectation of these approaches? I mean, personally, I think they will, as I said, matter of time, but I would like to hear your opinion.
I think that the Fervo news was a real shot in the arm for geothermal. Their success has been celebrated everywhere. I think it's absolutely fantastic to see that the performance was beyond expectation. And I can see, yes, they do have, it is a specific geological conditions, but those geological conditions will exist in so many other places. So that to me is incredibly exciting. And the fact that they actually have been able to produce energy at the scale that they anticipated and beyond is just fantastic. So there's a distinct place in the energy world for Fervo and other companies that will follow Fervo. And the great thing about Fervo is they publish their results in an environment where data is so difficult and expensive to come by. They just said, look, this is what we've done. And that is one of the things I love about geothermal is the willingness of people to collaborate. That it's a fantastic and refreshing thing coming from oil and gas, where everyone's kind of hiding their technology behind very heavy closed doors. Then to actually see people publish what they've done is another reason that geothermal is going to be propelled, as well as all those things, like government sponsorship and the relentless enthusiasm of the individuals in geothermal. That collaboration is fantastic. So will companies like Fervo be a big part of the future? Of course they will, as I say, and also the companies that come in behind them. And there'll be instances where Fervo system perhaps isn't as efficient as it would like to be, or they may drill a well that's a failure. So just bring in a closed loop and rescue that well with the closed loop. I can see there'll come a point in the future where there will be no geothermal failures. And to me, that's been the biggest problem in the past, is that you've had somewhere between 10 and 25%, depending on the stats that you look at, of geothermal projects have failed due to lack of connectivity in the deep subsurface. That won't happen anymore. If you look at the Eden project that you just mentioned, that was going to be a doublet. But they had some technical issues. They drilled the well, no problem. But I can't tell you exactly what the issues were. But they looked at what they had done. They looked at the fact that they had a 5,000-meter hole in the ground, and they turned it into a closed loop solution. That, to me, is the future. It would have been great if the open loop had worked, but it didn't. So they came up with a fix. And that fix is producing heat to the biomes down in Cornwall now. That is, in my view, a problem-solving success story, and stories like that will pop up everywhere. That solution at Eden it shows great promise, and as I say, it can only get better.
And you just mentioned that you could see combination of technologies happening, or combination of approaches happening, and that brought to my mind Sage Geothermal. They have this EGS and AGS approaches at the same time. I mean, that's a clear example. I mean, they are doing the closed loop in an area where they create these artificial reservoirs. I mean,
yeah, again, it's problem-solving technology. it's not something that would work in the UK because it involves fracking. And there's a moratorium in the UK. You can't frack for various reasons. I mean, coming from oil and gas, I understand how fracking can work successfully, but there's a massive anti-fracking group in the UK, so it's not going to happen here. But there are so many places in the world where it will happen. The guys at Sage seem very responsible, so I'm sure that they will follow the best practices and they'll be safe about what they do. So it's an elegant solution. It has its place, like Fervo, like Evil, like Seraphy, like Novus Earth in Canada, who are doing closed loop for heat. There are so many of these companies that are popping up, and many. I had a conversation last week with somebody who's quite prominent in geothermal, and he was saying people in this country haven't heard of Seraphy, for example, but have you heard of this other company? They do a similar thing, but it's in France, it's in Italy, it's in wherever it might be. These small companies are popping up everywhere, and they're using their own technology, which is taking a bit from here and taking a bit from there, but it's still a solution that's going to work. And that's the encouraging thing, the fact that there is so much expansion from so many of these startups, and the startups are growing. I mean, I don't think you can refer to Evor or even Fervo now as startups. They are companies which are developing their technology, and I think people consider that they will succeed. So that's the exciting part of it.
We just mentioned a number of companies, and one of them was Seraphy, which was the company you were working with up until very recently. So could you tell us, generally speaking, all the innovation that Seraphy is bringing to the table? That'll be also very interesting to know.
Yeah, I mean, I've already used the expression Occam's razor, and that is Seraphy. They have broken it down to the basics. If you have a simple solution which takes away all of the problems that can cause project failure, then that has to be one of the most elegant solutions. And that's what Seraphy have done. To me, one of the most interesting parts of Seraphy's work is the repurposing of existing oil and gas wells. The use of direct heat from a well that's already been drilled. Again, it's somebody coming in and looking at things from a different perspective. I know there are other companies that do repurposing, but of course, my knowledge is Seraphy, and I think that the solution there is fantastic. Technically, all you need to do is you need to find a well with a reasonable temperature at TD, pull out the oil and gas completion, put in this case, the Seraphy well, and away you go. You can produce heat. And to me, that is the low-hanging fruit. There are in excess of 20 million oil and gas wells globally. Let's just say 10% of those can be repurposed.
Yes.
I mean, that's huge. And that is decarbonization of the energy ecosystem using oil and gas wells. There's some irony there, which I think is fantastic. And I see that a whole industry will be built from repurposing oil and gas wells. So I think that is it's a great thing that Seraphy does. As I say, there are other companies that do it as well, but Seraphy is perhaps one of the most prominent. Mm-hmm. And to me, that industry will be rewarded.
Excellent. And now let's talk about geopolitics, energy transition, and geothermal. Let's combine the three. I live in Europe right now, in Latvia. Even though I'm Peruvian Canadian. I lived in Canada for almost 20 years. And I live in Latvia now. My wife is Latvian, by the way. Anyways, A year ago or so, it all seemed doom and gloom here in Europe because of the invasion of Ukraine. And the sanctions to Russia, which involved not buying its gas, seemed like Europe was shooting itself on the foot, as the continent relied heavily on this gas for heating and for manufacturing processes. This dilemma ended up resulting on the trigger for what I call energy transition acceleration. As an example of this, shallow geothermal appeared as an option for replacing gas furnaces with ground source heat pumps, something that was already being used in Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Finland. But now it's becoming almost mainstream. I know it's happening also in the UK, right? Here we're talking about a type of geothermal that it is the very small version of what I could compare with the Evor loops, right, or the closed loops, right? But a shallow depth. Obviously, the temperature is basically the idea is to have these loops or these pipes in a way that you can have your heat pump working more efficiently just by harnessing this very stable temperature that you have year-round there, right? I'm just mentioning this for some people in the audience that might not be familiar. But anyways, this is something that is growing all over Europe, especially in northern countries, right? Well, I have to admit also not only closed or shallow geothermal, but also air source heat pumps, which are less efficient. But anyways, so we see this energy transition acceleration in Europe. So many people are just ditching natural gas, right? And again, the interest to geothermal is continue to grow, not just for this shallow geothermal, but in general. And we have already discussed that a moment ago. So as far as Europe, we can see Europe is now, without a doubt, embarked in the transformation of its energy matrix, and geothermal is playing a role on this. Now, my question is, Andy, give us your opinion on the energy transition in general. Do you think fossil fuels will be phased out and fully replaced in the next few years? And to which extent geothermal will act as a replacement? Also, feel free, because fossil fuels is, we're talking about coal, oil, and natural gas. Feel free to, give a specific answer for coal, oil, and natural gas, if you prefer.
It's a great question. The geothermal evangelist in me would like to say yes, geothermal is going to replace everything. It'll be fine, but that's not the case. If you look at the way the world population is increasing, 200,000 people a day, I think it is, something like that. There's an ever increasing demand for energy. Last December was showed the greatest demand for oil and gas ever. So the demand for oil and gas is increasing. The use of oil and gas is increasing. The energy transition is referring to the replacement, if you like, of oil and gas by wind and solar and geothermal and hydrothermal and all of those other systems, but it's not being replaced, and that's the problem. It's the speed of these new technologies coming in. There's a huge amount of money being spent on alternative energy, but it's not enough. It's not fast enough. If I was starting out in oil and gas today, I wouldn't be concerned about the longevity of my career. There's still, I don't know what the latest figures are. I think fossil fuels are responsible for somewhere in the region of 73, 74% of global energy production. That's huge. And if you look at alternative energies, they're very small. Geothermal's 0.3%, maybe 0.4%, depending on the source that you use. There will come a time, yes, but it's not soon, is the answer. There's an acceleration. Again, depending on who you speak to, that the geothermal business is expanding. It's expanding quite rapidly, but to my view, it's not fast enough. There's not enough money coming into geothermal. There are not enough people who understand what geothermal can do, which is why one of the reasons I'm talking to you now, Jose, is the fact that we need to shout louder. We need to propel that expansion of geothermal, and the only way that's going to happen is by people being aware and by projects like Evor, like Fervo, like Seraphy in Yorkshire, all of these companies doing their thing and demonstrating to the world that geothermal doesn't have to be in Iceland. It doesn't have to be in the Western states. It doesn't have to be in Turkey and Kenya or Indonesia, those traditional places. Geothermal can be anywhere, and it doesn't have to be electricity. It can be heat. I coming from a closed loop background, I think that heat, direct heat use, is something that is completely undervalued. And going back to the ground source heat pump part that you mentioned earlier on, to see the ground source heat pump industry expand is fantastic. And you mentioned it's used for heating. I have some good friends who work for the UK's largest heat modeling company. They're called Genius Energy Lab, the company. And those guys can work wonders with just modeling these systems and demonstrating how you can use relatively low temperatures to replace so many sources of heat, and that includes cooling. You can use ground source heat pumps in an area that has 30 degrees Celsius every day of the year, and you can convert the underground heat and use it for cooling. It's in reverse. And that to me is also part of that energy transition. The energy transition is going to take a long time. It's going to be a mix of everything. It goes back to the thing we were talking about earlier on about all of these different companies contributing. We have to embrace everything. We have to embrace ground source heat pumps and geothermal and wind and solar and all of those things that aren't going to destroy the planet. We need to try and phase out coal first, then oil as a fuel, and then gas. But it's going to take, in my view, and it is just my view, it's going to take 100 years or more to see that happen. 2050 is a dream, which I think everybody with a shred of pragmatism in them realizes is not going to happen. It's great to have targets, and it's great to be looking at decarbonizing our energy, and it's great to be looking at not wasting oil and gas by burning it, for example. It has so many other applications which will be needed for a long time to come, but it's going to take a long time.
Now, a couple of decades ago, there was the fear of that we were going to run out of oil, right? And they were talking about peak oil. And they said all the reserves that exist have already been discovered. And there is not much to be discovered, right? And but time passed and there were more discoveries because technologies become better, allow for deeper drilling in a more efficient way, in a more efficient manner. And so these wildcat wells in very remote locations and deep offshore allow for finding more and more resources, and we continue to find. Personally, I've been part of few discoveries as I work in a deep offshore exploration. And now we know, I mean, there is a lot more than it was thought about oil, that it was thought only 2 decades ago. But now the discussion is peak oil demand, when the demand will start to curve and start to drop, right? We have had moments in which it seemed like it was going to come down. When in 2008 the prices of oil went above $100, and then the recession came, right? The demand dropped, and also the price. But the trend in general, as you mentioned, it's more people, more demand, is still growing. And last year, as you pointed out, was the year with the most consumption, right? But we're also seeing that the trend is decelerating. And there are some think tanks, some reports that are Rystad, for example, says that this peak oil demand will be in 2030. And that is, that opinion is shared by many people. That, I mean, still growing, but 2030 will probably be the peak. And we will continue, and I agree with you, to use oil for many more decades, but probably, for example, in the transportation sector, it will be less used because more people will use electric vehicles, right? But yeah, I agree. We will continue to use it for decades. It is just that probably at one point we'll have to reach a peak, and that is probably the time. It will be around 2030. I think I share that also, that view. But anyways, regardless of that, we can agree, because with the advent of the new technologies, geothermal being in the mix, we are in energy transition already. I think we agree that it is ongoing. There is no doubt. And oil companies are being part of that, and that's a very interesting thing. Oil companies are rebranding themselves as energy companies, right? They don't call themselves oil companies. They are energy companies. One that comes to my mind right now is Total, for example, Shell, Repsol. Those companies are not calling themselves oil companies, they are energy companies, because they are also investing in renewables and in fast charging stations, and along with their regular gasoline and diesel supply station, they are putting fast charging and things like that, right? And they are also, as you know, putting money into geothermal, for example. You will have Chevron and BP, for example, they have invested in Evo. So the energy transition is happening. It might take decades, maybe it's, probably we will not see this fossil fuels phase out maybe in the next 100 years, but the energy transition is happening. There will be a mix of both, and eventually, and I tend to believe that, yeah, eventually we will see, in the particular case of oil, that the demand will start to curve down. Anyways, we know geothermal is growing, and it is at the center stage of this energy transition. And shoulder to shoulder with solar, wind, hydrogen, energy storage in different forms and shapes, and even nuclear, all of them. And the community, now focusing in geothermal, the community is growing, and the very interesting thing, and we have brought this up earlier in this interview, is because of oil and gas. Geothermal, the way it is growing, wouldn't happen if it wasn't because of the contribution of oil and gas, right? Right now, this week, and it started last week, the largest Congress, well, it's there are conferences in different parts of the world, in different cities, different parts of the world. The largest, I would say, event in the world, Pivot 2023, is happening. And the role that oil and gas professionals are playing in this event is immense. I mean, it is happening because of these oil and gas professionals. If you see the profile of the people that are participating, are oil and gas professionals. Some of them are already working in geothermal. Some of them have great ideas that want to put into practice in geothermal. And also there is other interesting things that they are discussing along with geothermal and oil and gas, like geologic hydrogen is something that also I find it very, very interesting and with a lot of potential. But anyways, thanks to these conferences, more innovation is coming to the table and is being brought up. And thanks to this, the growth of the industry will continue to occur. I mean, this is the third year of Pivot, of this event Pivot, and it's gonna keep happening with so many mavericks and very smart people participating there. I can only see that oil and gas will be going more and more, or will pay more and more attention and interest and money to geothermal. So yeah, the geothermal community is growing very rapidly, and this is in part happening thanks to professionals like you, Andy, and institutions that I could mention hundreds of institutions, but it comes to my mind, for example, International Geothermal Association, Geothermal Rising, Geothermal Energy Advancement Association, which you are part of, you're an ambassador, like myself. Publications such as Think Geoenergy, initiatives like Project Inner Space, which is making this event Pivot, and many companies. I mean, if I start talking, we already talk about some companies here, but there are many that are making this happen. Oil and gas companies, service companies, and geothermal companies. And other companies that, even though they are not working, they are not getting dirty within the industry, but one of their core mission is to advocate and predicate and base load capital. They are good at that. When it comes to service companies, Baker Hughes is a big name in oil and gas. Now is fully, they have an area specific for geothermal, right? And Big Oil, again, I mentioned earlier, Chevron putting money and doing things in geothermal. And this comes along with these congresses like Pivot, conferences, seminars, webinars. The celebration of the World Geothermal Energy Day, by the way, also is something that I should mention. It's October 18 every year, So all these things are happening. And all of them are geared towards a common goal, which is making geothermal global, scalable around the world. And we're getting close to our to finalize this interview, and I would like to hear all your final message, Andy.
Oh, it's difficult to follow that. Yeah, everything you said. You two you're a great advocate of geothermal energy, Jose, and you're right. It's all of that stuff. You kind of focused a lot on the oil and gas input, and it is very, very important. But it's also important to look at the projects that would be seen as traditional geothermal, which are also receiving funding. You mentioned baseload capital. there are others. There's Kerrigan Capital, for example. They recently invested in the project down in Cornwall, at United Downs. That's nothing to do with oil and gas. Those deals are happening outside oil and gas. Yes, we have to look at oil and gas and say, you know, it's fantastic that oil and gas is kind of pushing geothermal along. And I guess oil and gas companies understand wells. They don't really understand wind and solar very well. They're kind of they have invested in it, but I think there's a great deal of enthusiasm, not just from the companies, but from the workforce and the professionals. That, you know, it's, you speak to a drilling engineer who works in oil and gas, and they think, well, it's a well. I can do that. I can go and work in geothermal, or a geoscientist, or somebody who works on rigs. A rig is a rig is a rig. You know, it's there is so much in common. So there is a natural partnership there, and as geothermal expands and becomes more reasonably sized, then of course there'll be an exodus. Maybe exodus is too strong a word. There'll be a migration from oil and gas to geothermal. But at the same time, we need those oil and gas guys to keep doing what they're doing, because, yeah, people may say I'm a pessimist, thinking the energy transition is going to take 100 years, but you know, some of the new geothermal technologies might be part of solving a very, very large part of that energy transition puzzle. But we need all of the energy we can get. It has to be an open-minded, collaborative approach. There needs to be that energy mix. As I mentioned earlier on, I hope that geothermal becomes far more significant in providing energy, both heat and electricity, and cooling. Let's not forget cooling, to the world. But it has to be something that is pragmatic. We can't sacrifice energy security. There have been decisions that have made in European politics over the last 18 months, which I think are fundamentally flawed. Yes, you know, for example, we are embracing alternative energies in the UK more than we did in the past, because the politicians who have this 4-year thought process, they consider being re-elected. They're not considering necessarily what's best for the country, what's best for the people of the country. We need to have long-term plans for an energy transition, and those plans have to include a supply of hydrocarbons when alternative energy can't do the job. We can't have developed countries like the UK, for example, having to import electricity from France because they don't have enough to supply themselves. We need to look at energy provision locally, regionally, and nationally, globally, as something that has to be fulfilled. And we haven't even talked about energy poverty, and those in the world who have no light switch or no electricity supply that they can. There are billions of people who don't have the luxury of what we have in Europe, and governments are talking to them and saying, well, we don't think you should provide, or you should be exploring for hydrocarbon. We're not going to give you the funding that we used to, and that decision is based on, for example, looking at the UK again. We used to fund international projects looking for hydrocarbons. We don't do that anymore, and the reason is that politicians think it'll make them unpopular and might affect the votes that they receive. So a little bit controversial, perhaps, but I think that we need to be a bit more human in our approach to energy provision. We have to supply everybody we can, and we have to look at it from a commercial, pragmatic, and energy transition perspective. It has to be holistic.
So I guess in short, we could conclude that when it comes to oil and gas and geothermal, it is not black or white or dirty versus clean. It is both. And the acknowledgement that one relies heavily on many technological advancements developed by the other. And like the analogy yes, and like the analogy of the distance cousins that I brought up earlier, imagine one of the cousins, oil and gas, is much older than the other, but significantly wiser. And now he's passing his wisdom to the younger cousin, geothermal, and wishing him best of lucks and giving him a hug. And as he knows that he's getting old and his golden splendor might be almost over, although it's controversial, right? I think eventually we're gonna hit this curve in the demand, and it's not gonna be too far in the future. But we will continue to use all these, and what I want to highlight is not black or white, as I said, or dirty versus clean. We need it. We need all, and I mean, and we should embrace each other. Do you have more to add to conclude?
Yeah, I mean that's an important. You talk about peak oil. Sure, maybe it'll come in 2030, but that doesn't mean that at that point we don't need oil anymore. We will need oil far beyond. We've been dependent on oil for 100 years or more, and that demand will increase unless something comes along that solves the problem. And of course, that's people talk about fusion, for example. It's always 10 years away. It's the joke. It's fusion will solve the problem when it comes. It's 10 years away. But when that happens, then maybe that'll be the solution. It might be, for example, that a combination of the current geothermal technologies are melded together in order to come up with a solution which will work everywhere. And that might be the answer. There might be something else that we haven't even thought of. But until then, it's oil and gas. Hopefully more gas than oil because it's cleaner. As I've mentioned, I've always been an environmentalist. I always want to look for the solution that's going to provide less pollution or no pollution. That's what we need to be striving for. So sure, let's stop using coal. Then let's stop using oil, and then let's stop using gas as a fuel. But it's going to take a very long time. Peak oil 2030, and then you'll have hopefully a rapid decline. But what is a rapid decline? It's going to take a very, very long time before we're not dependent on oil and gas. Yes. My hope is that, it comes sooner rather than later, but the pragmatism in me suggests that that's not going to happen anytime soon. And it's certainly not going to happen by 2050. I'm probably going to be crucified for saying that, but it's what I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we need hydrocarbons. And peak oil demand, yes, eventually will curve down, but that doesn't mean, as you highlighted, that stops. The demand will continue. And again, geothermal will be a big actor. It will have a big role in all this energy transition. And it's not the only solution, as we also discussed it. And we have many others that are coming along, the cousins, the other renewables. And let's just hope for a better future for our planet, for our communities, and for the industry, geothermal industry, and on all the great professionals that make oil and gas and geothermal ingrained in the energy matrix. Thank you very much, Andy. It's been a pleasure having this conversation. And I hope we can interact again in the near future. I'm sure we will over LinkedIn as usual. But yeah, who knows? Maybe we will meet in a conference, or maybe we will work together at one point. Thank you very much. And if you want to give a final word.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say thanks for setting up this interview and for your advocacy. We need to talk about geothermal energy as much as we can. So I appreciate what you're doing, and also for your support on LinkedIn over the years. It's great to have people like you who stand up and wave the flag. So thanks, Jose. It's been great to meet you, and we'll see each other again.
Thank you. And to all the audience that is listening this interview, thank you for following us. I will make sure I will do these podcasts regularly. I will be going to Namibia for a project on the 2nd of October, and I'll be gone for 1 month. So upon my return, I am planning to do another podcast. This time will be related to geologic hydrogen. And until then, thank you.